Hello, and welcome to our live webcast, CEO Executive Roundtable, 2020 Perspective and Outlook for 2021. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jacob, and I will be the operator for the presentation today. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings that you may have. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the text chat window. There is a large window which holds all of your sent messages and a smaller text box at the bottom where you will type in your questions. To send a question, click in the text box and type your text. When finished, click the send button. All questions that you submit are only seen by today's presenters. Your questions will be responded to throughout the presentation. At the conclusion of today's program, we ask that you complete a brief post-event survey. Please take a moment to complete this survey as it will help CAS plan future web events. I will now turn the event over to Steve Armstrong, President of the CAS.
Thank you so very much, and I'd like to welcome you all to our CEO Executive Roundtable today, where we will be talking about perspectives on 2020 and outlook for 2021 and beyond. Our panel today is a diverse set of industry professionals who know a thing or two or three about the current and future state of the P&C insurance industry. Let me remind you of who we have on our panel today. In alphabetical order, by last name, we have Victor Carter-Bay, the CEO of our very own CAS. We have Sean Kevelin, the President and CEO of the Insurance Information Institute, also known as the III. We have Ryan Michelle, President and CEO of Allstate Insurance Company of Canada, and Alice Underwood, Global Leader of Insurance Consulting and Technology at Willis Towers Watson. Now, the format of this roundtable is to explore a conversation in four parts, where I, as the moderator, will introduce each topic and then ask each of our panelists to say a few words on that particular topic. From there, we're going to ask the panelists to comment on each other's comments, and most importantly, take questions from you, the audience. This means you, our audience, will get to ask questions of the panelists at 4 different times during the roundtable to coincide with the 4 different topics of discussion. At the end of each of our 4 rounds, which will last, approximately 15 minutes or so apiece, I'll ask one final question and, if time remains, allow for additional questions and answers from you, the audience. So get your fingers ready to start asking questions as we delve right in. And so, with no further ado, topic number 1. The topic is called Your Career and Lessons for Those Who Aspire to Executive Roles. And so my question is, did you aspire to be in the position you are in today? And assuming so, what was your development plan to get there, and what skills do you believe were the most helpful? So I'll turn it over to Alice to kickstart us on this one, please.
Thanks, Steve. Honestly, I'm not sure that I specifically aspired to be the leader of a business. My job, I'm sort of like a mini CEO within Willis Towers Watson. There is one CEO. That's the big boss, John Haley. But I'm responsible, for the CEO type responsibilities for my business. And I think, how I landed in this role was I saw a need. So my predecessor, he had the opportunity to become the CEO of an insurance company. And when he left, there was an opening, and I looked at that and said, well, I think I could do that. And so I threw my hat in the ring. How did I prepare for it? I think everything in my career before had prepared me for it, but in terms of how did I specifically prepare to interview for the role, I talked to a lot of colleagues and mentors, people who had had similar positions before. I got some great recommendations about books to read. I worked up my 90-day plan as part of the preparation for the interview process and got feedback from folks on that. And I think just, leading into it with the life experience of what had I seen in my prior life sitting in the reinsurance business, but working closely with the insurance consulting and technology business, what was my perspective from the outside of what would help to make the business thrive.
Thank you, Alice. Sean, how about your story in terms of how you got into the role you're in today?
It's and probably when we start talking again about talent and things like that, this will be a big challenge that we have to overcome. But like many, I fell into the industry. I think I've always aspired to be a leader, and tried to surround myself or be in environments where I thought there was good leadership. And in particular, I started in government and public affairs. I was able to see leadership in that area, and then fortunately move into business and see some insurance leaders and be introduced to insurance. And for me, when you're aspiring to be a leader, when you want to kind of have an upward trajectory in your career, I think the most important thing that I've understood is that you've got a lot to learn. Instinct is a very sliver of the full leadership package that you must bring, and I'm a big believer in leaders having what I call humble pride, not always believing that they have all the right answers, and working with others to bring others along is something that I think is critical. Collaboration is a big strategic pillar for the III, and I think collaboration is a key component of leadership as well.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. Ryan, please, would you let us know a little bit about your story and how you got into the position you're in today?
Sure. I never aspired to be a pixelated person on one of these panels. And in the same way, I never aspired to be a CEO either. The first glimpse I had that maybe I could do this was when I first came to Canada. I originally started with Whole State down in Chicagoland. But when I first came, and at the time I was the CRO, Chief Risk Officer, and led our product organization, and I went to all of our board meetings. I kind of worked with the CEO, and he said, "Hey, I think you should come along." And as I sat in those meetings, I said, "You know what? I think I could do that job, and I think I would enjoy it." And that was probably the first time it crossed my mind that I could lead an organization with that many functions in it. But, as an actuary, I think we rely a lot on our expertise and our skills and our knowledge. So I think the starting point really was years before when I started laying the groundwork for understanding the insurance business. And that meant going through the exams, understanding all the levers, and then building relationships in the organization too that are things that weren't natural to the actuarial path, right? Understanding sales, understanding claims operations, maybe a little more detailed. But those are things that would require an experience over time.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. And Victor, how about I know you have a unique story as well, so please share.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and great hearing the stories from all the panelists so far. And I think what I'm sensing is that there's probably a similarity amongst all of us, that while the specific aspiration to be a CEO may not have been there, we've all had a desire to lead and to be able to drive some sort of direction for an organization or some sort of function within that organization. And as I think about my own work, I've always aspired to toe the balance between being involved in the development of strategy as well as the execution of that strategy. And I think the roles that we all play certainly allow for that in different forms and fashions. Now, with that said, the CEO role is not the only role that you can certainly toe that balance. And I think there are a lot of different roles within organizations that allow for that. In thinking about my own development, it took me across a number of different industries, from finance to working in workforce development to credentialing, education. So a few different areas, which ultimately I think really helped to round me out in terms of not only my interests, but also some of those aspirations and how could I find a role, how could I find an organization that allowed me to bring those different worlds together in some sort of creative and innovative way. And I'm certainly very thankful that the CAS has afforded me that opportunity. But I think as you go forward and as you are thinking about your own development, and we have all mentioned it, it's really important to get in with the right people, develop mentors, understand from the standpoint of how do you make yourself visible, raise your hand for working on different projects. And those are some of the things that have certainly helped me along my career, just standing up and advocating for yourself, which is, I think we're all our own best advocates when it comes to that, and not being afraid to do so. And when all is said and done, I think the door really does open for the variety of opportunities that you can be considered for.
Well, thank you, Victor. As a reminder, at this point of the conversation on topic number one, we would like to hear from you, the audience, in terms of what questions you have. I see no questions yet, so please warm up those fingers and feel free to start asking our panel anything that's on your mind and with respect to how they became CEOs and or executives in their profession. But before we get some questions, let me just throw a few more out to you. Sean, you mentioned collaboration being a very important skill and a core value of the III. Is collaboration a skill that can be learned? And if so, what would be your recommendation on that?
Yeah, collaboration can absolutely be learned. It is something that perhaps some people it doesn't come naturally. Oftentimes I think in a career path you have what's called kind of an individual contributor, and that person, especially if they're an ambitious person, is looking to kind of advance themselves. Whereas when you become a broader leader with a more diverse skill set, and one I think that would be able to then take over a larger organization as a CEO or the like, that means you've got to bring a team along with you. That means that you've got to make sure that people are working together, and perhaps it's not just your own team. It needs to be other groups and organizations that you also need to bring together. I think one in this industry we do have some challenges in that, but I've been very encouraged through the COVID-19 era that we're seeing more industry collaboration. One CEO told me right when I took this role that he would hope I could get our industry to do less finger pointing at each other and more holding hands, and that has really rung true for me. We did things as an industry like get through the last financial crisis more, or I should say better probably than any other part of the financial services world. We contribute more to GDP oftentimes than banking as an industry. And so there's a lot of collaboration that needs to come so that people can feel that. We still have reputational challenges that we face in policy making and other areas that we're going to be stronger together. I do think in this COVID-19 era, though, I've seen a fundamental shift in the amount of collaboration that's happening, and that's very encouraging.
Thank you, Sean. We do have a few questions that have come in from our audience. I'm going to start with one from Adam. Adam writes, as a CEO or executive professional, how much weight do you place on demonstrated results versus intangible, risky, but high payoff opportunities in terms of running the business versus growing the business? Anybody want to make a comment to help Adam understand how much weight you put between those two binary options?
I heard it said last year, recognize for great activity, reward for results. And I thought, that was strictly around more like compensation and bonus levels, that type of thing. But, I thought that was really good guidance from a leader that I was working with. And that for activity, recognize all day long, every minute of every day. If you want to move in the right direction, share that result, right, with those people who are the most valuable and influencing and coming up with the ideas and making the execution done. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and, but it can be done a little bit differently.
I'd jump in on that and say, there's a danger of, and I think maybe it's intrinsic for those of us who followed the actuarial educational path. It teaches us to identify risk, right? And so there's a danger that we become risk averse. I think as actuaries, it's really important that we recognize that just kind of sticking to the old comfortable stuff also entails risk. And so it's important for every organization to be able to grow and change. One of the things I tend to kind of try to look for silver linings, whatever is happening. And obviously this pandemic is a terrible humanitarian disaster. It's an economic disaster, but maybe one of the bright things that's coming out of it is that we as an industry are recognizing we can actually change more quickly than we might have thought. A lot of organizations went kind of from the beginning of week, everybody in the office, to by the end of the week, everybody was working remotely, and we're making it work.
Very well said, Alice.
Yeah, I would just also add on as you're looking at programs and plans and tactics and trying to make sure that, you're measuring yourself. Metrics, I've learned from someone, what gets measured gets done. And as you're looking at those metrics, don't be afraid to make a change if it's not working. That can oftentimes, I think, be the riskiest as you're trying to mobilize yourself, as you're trying to get things done. If it simply is something that's just not working the way that it should, sometimes and oftentimes the most important list is when you have to tell yourself what you're not going to do anymore in order to make sure that you're getting the results that Ryan mentioned earlier. So certainly that, and then just to add, I think, the adapting that we're seeing here, all of us being online, but also really encouraged by the new strategic plan that's being put forward by the CAS, and certainly we've been doing that. Victor and I have sat down and exchanged programs and plans and things, because even our nonprofit organizations, we're all needing to evolve into a new world. And so I think the timing of the new strategic plan that CAS put out and listening to it in the town hall earlier was very encouraging.
Now, all of you either implicitly or explicitly kind of hinted that actuaries in general are risk averse, and that sometimes taking yourself out of your comfort zone is necessary for personal growth and advancement. My question to you is, can you give any examples of taking a risk and it not working like you thought it might, and how you learn from that to continuously advance versus just give up?
Yeah, well, let me take a stab at that question. It's a great question, and hopefully we're providing some examples and evidence that will give all of us, even those here as part of the panelists, some food for thought. So I'm thinking back to one of my previous employers, and there was an opportunity to work on a new research and development project focused on learning, and really from an advanced standpoint, how to accelerate learning in new and creative and innovative ways. And it was complete, measured risk for the organization in terms of taking this step in that direction. We invested millions of dollars. I think when all was said and done, was upwards of a $10 or $13 million project. And it was all a little bit of a gamble, but again, a measured one. And the organization had identified me as someone who could lead that particular initiative. And I'm thinking about, hey, listen, what if this doesn't play out? What if it doesn't work? What's going to happen to me? And as we're going through, we start the project. It's going pretty well. We're having our ups and our downs, as you will with any sort of R&D project. And we were at a pretty low point at a certain stage, and we're all asking ourselves, where is this headed? And I think the writing was on the wall that it wasn't the appropriate fit, and that we were going to move forward and divest from the project. But nonetheless, the point is that it was an opportunity to raise your hand and say that, hey, I'm willing to do this. And I think if the organization had taken the time to identify me as someone who they thought and had enough confidence in to take on that role, and if I had turned that down, I think that would have certainly set in their minds, hey, is this someone who's perhaps not as opportunistic or willing to take that chance as he might be? And although that project ultimately didn't move forward in the fashion that we initially hoped, I think it did create and answer a lot of questions for the organization about directionally where we should go, how we might do our next round, because this was also our first venture as an R&D project, and it answered some questions about how we might do this going forward. So in many respects, we set a platform and stage for how to do these things in the future, and I think, again, lessons learned, a lot of good that came out of it.
Thank you, Victor, for sharing. Alice, Sean, or Ryan, anything you'd like to add to your personal stories about any stumbles or opportunities where the risk didn't pay off, but you still learned a lot?
I don't know I don't kind of know the counterfactual to this, but there have been a couple of times when I've been asked to take a role that's been a promotional role, and I said no. And I've just felt like I've had a lot to learn in the position that I have still been in, and that I've enjoyed it, and that there's still more for me to learn and contribute. So that's, in my mind, that was a risky move to say, I'm not interested, and I don't know that would necessarily fly in every organization or every culture. But for me, that felt like a risk. I was a little bit nervous about shaking my head a little bit, but yeah.
Thanks, Ryan.
Hey, Steve, can I quickly just add on to Ryan's comment? I think it's a good example of sometimes when you are provided an opportunity and you do say no, that there's there are different things that can come from that. So again, if I'm going back to this scenario, this example that I just shared with you all, during that time, I had actually been approached from a really sizable professional association, one of the real top players in that market, and I was actually provided an opportunity to lead one of their credentialing and membership areas, and went through the interview process, was provided or offered, I should say, the job, but turned it down. And they were working with an executive recruiter, Korn Ferry in that case, and I was really just all over myself. I can't say no. They've taken all this time and energy, but I was working this project, and I truly wanted to stay committed to that project. So advance forward 3 or 4 years later, when the CAS has started its CEO search and they used Korn Ferry, I was so pleased and honored that because I did things the right way in terms of removing myself from that previous recruiting effort, that Korn Ferry thought of me as someone who might be interested and reached out to me. And again, here I am today. So I think that's also another example of where you can still say no, but if you do things the right way, they can still work out for you.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate that. Before we move on to the next topic, there's a few other questions that have kind of come in. I'm going to kind of mash them up a little bit together. I'm going to ask you all to give one-word answers. So some people really kind of want to know what is the number one skill or the number one competency that you might recommend for actuaries if they want to develop into more advanced types of leadership roles. So just pick what you believe to be the most paramount or top skill or the one you put the most stock in, and what would that be? So we'll start with you, Ryan.
Would be an acronym.
Sure.
I'm going to say serve.
Okay. And then I'll come back and round back through all these. So serve, Victor?
I would say, well, it's not that one word, but again, taking risk. So I failed already, Steve. I couldn't give you one word.
2 words.
You took a risk and broke the rules. Alice, if you play by the rules, what's your one word?
Listen.
I almost said what, and it was not intentional, but I got it. Sean?
Got 2 different ones, but I'm going to say soft.
All right. Because I'm most intrigued by soft to start. Can you elaborate a little bit, Sean?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say soft skills, but I also didn't want to break the rules, so...
Come on, Sean.
But, yeah, I think, and the other word I was thinking about was open, because I think, an actuary, obviously, you can get yourself into an actuarial career, and a really good one. We know the statistics. I'm not one, but, the statistics are out there that you're very happy in your career as an actuary for the most part. You've got a very good career path. So I think it's very easy for individuals to lock themselves into that and not necessarily go and acquire softer type of skills that might help them advance into different areas of an organization. Because to be a leader, you have to have good soft skills. You have to be able, like I said, to foster collaboration, to manage people, to help teams move along. All of those require a certain way, and it's not easy. It's not easy to. When you're a leader, sometimes you want to just say, this is what we need to do, and that's not always what a leader should do, really. People want to be brought in and feel a part of something, and that requires listening, as Alice said, asking questions, and those just at least for me, I don't think they're always instinctively. I think you got to take some time to learn them and figure out how to advance those skills in addition to those hard ones that you have as an actuary.
And then Ryan, I'd just like you to elaborate a little bit on serve. I think listen and risk-taking are a little more obvious, but serve, some people may interpret that differently. So can you clarify what you meant by serve?
Yeah, I love what Sean said. To me, it's the same idea of you got to get in the habit and then serving, right? So that may be in your function where you're learning how to do a reserve, and then you're figuring out how to serve your organization by doing that the best you can. It may be in learning about what it means to be a good salesperson, even though you're an actuary, and then figuring out how to serve that part of the organization. And maybe now that you've learned 4 or 5 parts of an insurance company, how do you bring them all together to serve the broader company? So to me, it's that serving is thinking about who am I benefiting all the time in the learning. It's not just yourself. And I think it's the key part to collaborating is you got to understand other people.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we've explored this topic enough so that we can move on to topic number 2. There were still leftover questions, but I might bring those back at the very end. But let's transition into topic number 2. And topic number 2 is industry outlook. So kind of a 2-part question. Number 1 is, what are the issues keeping you up at night? And then conversely, what are you most excited about now in the industry, either today or going forward? So what excites you and what keeps you up at night? So I'll turn it over to Victor to start us this time, please.
Yeah, just real quickly, the thing that keeps me up at night is the ongoing relevancy of our members and the work that they do. And this is where the CAS has the opportunity to help round our members out, to give them pathways, to be a partner to them as they move along their career journeys, to ensure that relevancy remains. So that's something that certainly keeps me up at night. And when you think about relevancy, it's also a matter of value. And I think when our members are adding value to their organizations, they'll grow and they're going to be relevant. And when you're growing and relevant, you're probably adding value. So there's really a continuum there that makes sense to me. And I'm excited about the opportunity that we have going forward to play a role in that equation as we think about some of the things we talked about earlier, 3-year plan, as well as some of the admissions changes we'll be making for education going forward.
How about you, Alice? What's keeping you up at night, and what's getting you excited about the future?
Keeping me up at night, definitely the ongoing pandemic and what's that going to mean for the economy broadly. I'm very worried about the impact on small business and what that will mean, for our communities, for our societies. And at the same time, as I said before, I think kind of, well, okay, what are the good things that may come of this? I think a lot of things have been highlighted by the pandemic that we can do better as a society, as an industry. I think, the opportunity to serve the economy by providing some financial stability is one of the things that is, the purpose of the insurance industry. And I think we're finding that we can, as I said, we can change more quickly than maybe we thought we could. Maybe we will be more quick to adopt useful technology that we might have been dragging our feet on. I think just for the whole, yes, it is possible for people to get work done from home. We would love to be able to see our colleagues face to face once again when it's safe, but it is possible to do these things. It's possible to work with our clients, even our international clients, without traveling to see them. And that means that, we can do things more cost effectively. So I think, obviously getting the world past this global health crisis, we're going to be different coming out than we were going in. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that many of the ways in which we're different will be better, but we can't just close our eyes and cross our fingers and hope. We have to take actual positive steps to make sure that the lessons that we're learning and the weaknesses that are being uncovered get addressed.
Very well said, Al. Thank you. Ryan, what's keeping your pixelated face up at night, and what's keeping you excited as well?
Yeah. I would say the first thing is, definitely the 2,800 Allstate employees here in Canada. How are they doing through this? And it's much of them in different ways. As the pandemic goes on, that's what keeps me up the most. More broadly, I would say, and similar to what Alice said, it makes me think about how we are in the industry are solving societal issues. How are we drawing the lines between things that are insurable, uninsurable, things that are manageable, things that can be prevented? And I think about big issues like, obviously, the pandemic, and we think about business insurance, we think about catastrophic risk and climate change, we think about healthcare. All these things are top of the thing. And I feel like as an industry, sometimes we say we can't do it or throwing it over to the government to figure out how to do it, but they don't have the expertise. And so it just feels like there's an opportunity for us to step into a bit of a void and provide expertise bigger than any of our individual companies. And so that's something that's definitely on my mind right now.
Sean, you have a purview, I'm sure, with your day job of the industry, so I think everybody's very excited to hear about your outlook for 2021 and conversely also what's kind of keeping you up at night.
Well, just to piggyback on what Ryan was saying, because I think just so many good points were made there, and I think we should be excited in this industry and more in what we can do, what we're capable of, and the benefits that we bring. But I find also it's hard for us to actually talk about it. It's encouraging that we have begun to see some industry collaboration. Ryan mentioned the business insurance issue. There was a lot of industry collaboration that went on with not just a reputational challenge, but certainly one that could put systemic strain on the industry if we were starting to retroactively write contracts to cover business insurance when it wasn't underwritten in that way. We at III were able to start a campaign and inform the discussion, but you saw the trade associations, for the most part, come together and present solutions. And so a lot of good collaborative work that I think we should leverage because we still have some challenges ahead, and Ryan mentioned some of these, and those are the ones that keep me up at night. As much as we're all excited about innovation and what it's doing and how we can better utilize big data and artificial intelligence and have new variables and things like that, there are consumer protection challenges and regulatory challenges that could trench that all back and pull us all back from it if we don't communicate well. If we don't, and that's one of our priorities for 2021 as an organization is looking at ways to develop a campaign that people better understand that insurance is good and it's getting better. Because if we don't communicate about it, people are going to start getting upset, and that's where our innovation could get stifled. Similarly with climate change, our industry is absolutely one of the most well-poised industries to present solutions to climate change. We manage risk. We know how to make people, communities, structures more resilient. We have all of that expertise, and we should start feeding that expertise into the broader good. So we at III are even beginning to work with other financial services group, about 14 other groups, have begun coming together under the leadership of Tim Adams at the Institute of International Finance to really embrace this issue, take it on, and present solutions. And insurance has really good solutions. And if we can help people understand that those are solutions and the industry is doing this, maybe people wouldn't just fall into the industry when they, in terms of how they got here, right? So I think there's a lot of reputational challenges out there, but I think if we can communicate the right way, we will be well poised to lead.
Yeah, Sean, thank you for that. You mentioned, well, between you and Ryan and Victor as well, I think you're all kind of focused in on relevancy, adding value, being able to participate in solving societal problems, doing it the right way and not coming across as the antagonist, but more the protagonist. When you look at 2021, beyond climate change, maybe business interruption, which you've said we're kind of already working on in many ways, what are we not looking at, or what are we not as a community potentially engaged in talking about that we should be, if anything? I'm just kind of curious. Will 2021 see us get more engaged in something that we've historically not been talking about as actuaries, or any other societal problems that we've just traditionally not been at the table on? I'm just curious if there's anybody who has an outlook for 2021 on that.
Steve, I'd say all of these societal problems are really the function of not thinking about an end consumer and all the risks they face, whether it's a business client or a personal client. And I'm actually really hopeful and excited about the future because, as everybody knows, data has been exploding left, right, and center, and that's only going to keep going. The question is, who's going to be able to harness it to really change to be what the customer values, right? And it's not going to take thousands of people. It can take a few good actuaries, right, who really understand how to model data and don't necessarily put it towards loss cost, don't necessarily put it towards premium, but focus it on a consumer issue. What could make the world a better place? But with the ton of data that's out there around this, that, and the other around a consumer, there are solutions out there for the getting. And I think that innovation doesn't have to come from Silicon Valley. but it can come from the people in this virtual room.
You're right.
Absolutely. I mean, I just jump in on that to what Ryan was saying. Understanding where there are coverage gaps and where there are underserved segments, risks that don't have good products to help people address them, or you talk about kind of what are the typical emerging risks. Obviously, this year we're focusing on pandemic. Climate change has been a constant emerging risk that needs more work and more in the way of public-private partnerships probably to help address it. But then also cyber is a classic there, and I think with cyber you could talk about public-private partnerships, but you could also just talk about the way products are constructed. Is a standalone cyber product the right thing? Is building the cyber peril into other types of products the right thing? Is there, a combination of these approaches? But I think showing ourselves to be an industry that is a problem-solving industry and that is looking for ways to solve additional problems as opposed to saying, well, that's not our problem. I think that's what will help us really be a vibrant industry into the future, and also to attract people that want to be problem solvers.
That's right. Well said. Well said. We have a question from Lifetime Achievement Award winner Ron, who would like to kind of ask the question. Congratulations, Ron. His question reads like, as CEOs and executives, how might you balance short-term views versus long-term views? So we were just kind of talking about 2021 and 2020, possibly a myopic look, right? So I think Ron is challenging us to say, how do you think about balancing short-term views versus long-term views, especially with regards to maybe financial objectives and, if you're a publicly traded company, shareholder value? So any commentary kind of in the way that you balance short-term and long-term views, given the priorities of your day-to-day work?
I would say very quickly, you truly can't do one without the other. I don't think it's an absolute scenario. And any decision that we're making today, you want to understand what's the trajectory of that decision, what's the impact of that decision to your various stakeholders, which then requires you to take a longer-term view. Now, the balance that we strike on an everyday basis, particularly in the world of a pandemic, does focus more on the short term. But I would think that when you are able to put together comprehensive plans and strategies for the future that are dynamic enough that you can change them and then you can pivot, but they at least serve as an anchor for which to really ground you in terms of where it is you should be focused, it allows you to navigate back and forth between the longer term view and that of the short term.
We set goals in 2012 that were very simple. It was, we want to double our revenue every 10 years and achieve a certain rate of return over that period. So it set benchmarks for a longer period of time, not a set number of years, but as a moving target. But it gave clarity to the organization exactly what kind of rate of return we wanted each year. We measure ourselves to that, looked over the last 10 years, and continued to kind of move. And so it doesn't eliminate short-term goals, because there are short-term goals year to year, but it gives people that sense of we're on a longer-term journey.
I think that's maybe the most vital thing that a business leader can do is not lose sight of the long term and refocus people on the long term objectives, because it is very easy. All the pressures around you. If you're in a reactive mode, you're going to be in a short term mode, because all the stuff that's coming at you every day is pretty short term. And so you have to be able to kind of, accept, yes, there are those short term pressures and they have to be managed, but they need to be managed in the service of the longer term strategy and vision for the organization.
I think if you're too short term, you also forget about the customer, right? The customer, that to me is keeping folks focused on how are we improving this product, this service for the customer. That doesn't happen overnight. You got to build to it.
Yeah.
Sarah's been asking a few interesting questions. One of them, Sarah, I promise we'll get to in the next topic, but I'm going to refer back to your last question. The theme of her question is a little bit more about being proactive versus reactive. So it kind of, that question asks, how might the industry prepare for the next unforeseen event? A very lofty question, I get it, but yeah, she says like the next pandemic or another 9/11, et cetera. maybe at the core of her question is, are we doing enough to prepare for the next one versus react at the time when it actually does happen and then jump into the table? Any thoughts on how we could ask or answer that question on behalf of Sarah's question?
Well, maybe I can take a stab at it just from how we look at things at III and focus a lot on communications and reputation issues. And throughout my career, I've learned that if you're not in control in communications, then you're in somebody else's hands, and oftentimes that's a very dangerous place when it comes to dealing with the likes of media and journalists. And so if you're not thinking about what issues are out there, what could come of those issues, positive and negative, and develop ways that you can get ahead of it. We began our FAIR campaign, the Future of Insurance and Reinsurance. Really, we had to activate that very quickly, but for all intents and purposes, that was still a reactive campaign because the issue happened and we were running after it. What I had mentioned earlier about innovation and climate, these are things that we know are coming. There will be challenges that are coming to us around innovation and how we're using new innovation, and how do we then demonstrate that insurance does good and it is using this well? We have to proactively communicate this. Same with climate and weather. We have to make sure that people understand, beyond the political discussions and debates, insurance is right there presenting solutions and helping communities be more resilient. But we've got to make sure we tell those stories ahead of all of this, or else the challenges are just going to become that harder to overcome.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Anybody want to add anything to what Sean mentioned? Okay.
Having said some optimistic things, my note of doom and gloom is my rule of thumb had always been, okay, whatever was the worst thing that's happened up till now, the next thing that's really bad is going to be at least twice as bad. So, kind of accepting that, there are going to be those things out there that happen. We don't know what the next thing is. That's why it's the unknown unknown. But accepting that it will likely be worse than what we've experienced in the past is important.
Well said. Amy has an interesting question as well. Her question is, what do you believe will be the biggest change to the insurance industry as a direct result of the current pandemic? So if you looked in your crystal ball and said the biggest change to our industry is X as a result of this current pandemic, how would you fill in the blank?
I think it's going to be in how we work. I think the flexible work schedules, the more often working from home, less often being in the office is going to be a permanent change. There are pros and cons to that. So one of the things that I've been thinking about with my team is, when the health crisis is over and it's possible, for us to be in an office safely, many of our colleagues may not want to do that. And so how do we have effective team meetings? We figured out how to do it with everybody remote. We know how to do it with everybody in person. How are we going to do it when we have, half and half or whatever the split is? What strategies are we going to adopt? How will we make sure that we get the benefits of being together in person? Because for sure there are benefits that you don't get when you're interacting with everybody on the little screens on the computer. How do you leverage the benefits of the team being together when maybe not all of them are in the office the same day and some of them don't come into the office at all? I think, addressing that way of working challenge is probably the thing that will make us look the most different in the future. And it's not unique to the insurance industry.
Alex, on that point, I understood your answer very well, but then there was a question earlier, which I think I'd just like to tag onto this, which is, in a consulting company where presumably face-to-face with clients proves different than working in an insurance company where you're not always face-to-face with the clients, how do you see consulting companies navigating through this going forward? More client visits, less? Any speculation on that you'd like to offer?
And that is absolutely one of the biggest challenges for us, and it's certainly more difficult to generate new business, to identify new client needs, and get out in front of them and say, hey, here's how we can help you with that, when we're not just kind of more casually interacting with a client, it does make that a bigger challenge. It's also, I think, talked about listening as being such an important skill. Listening and interacting in a virtual environment is different. You miss a lot of the cues. You miss a lot of the body language cues that you would otherwise get. It's more important if you've got a team from your shop interacting with a team at the client to be really clear about exactly who's responsible for what portion of that meeting and what you need to get out of that meeting. So I think it is teaching us to be a little better at planning, a little less off the cuff. But there is for sure something that you miss by not being able to be right there with a client. So I think maybe it's just more of a balance, that those things that can be done remotely, and that creates a cost saving for the client. It'll make sense to do them remotely, but there'll definitely be other things that once it's possible to do them in person, they'll be much more impactful when we can get together again.
So Alice mentioned that she thinks that the way we work with our own employees or with clients and everybody else in between is one of the biggest changes we'll face in our industry, not unique to our industry, but for our industry for sure. Sean, Victor, or Ryan, do you have any other perspectives or speculations on how the pandemic will change us going forward? Ryan, go ahead.
Sean, you spoke a little bit. In Canada, we've got our own kind of industry coalitions and trade groups, and we had a conversation with some CEOs. And as we've looked back at past pandemics or crises, what you find is those don't necessarily bring in unique changes in people's behavior, but it accelerates changes that were already in progress. And so when you think about people working from home or alternatively, that was going on, but now it's just escalated that by 50 times, right? I think the same thing about consumers, right? Like, how quickly can consumers adjust their shopping behavior? Because now they weren't going into a store, or they're not going to eat. Now, some of those things they'll revert back to because there's the social element to it, but people are getting accustomed to change more quickly, right? Not just at work. We talk about change all the time. I'm sure your organizations do too. But consumers are, right? Before, might have even, any consumer might have walked in and paid in cash or check. That feels like so 2019, right? So it will escalate change and expectations for change for consumers to absorb it. I would say that's the other thing I would say.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, Ryan, the consumer side, because I think that's really one of the biggest challenges as a result of the pandemic. We now find the situation that we're in where the consumer presumably has more choice. And as we operate in the virtual world, those barriers to entry are being lowered for new different types of organizations to compete with all the different things that we all do in our own different respective organizations. And we have to figure out a way to combat that. But we also have to think about it from the consumer perspective that they now have different ways that they want to engage and interact with us. So some will want to do it virtually, some will want to do it in a physical fashion, and we have to accommodate for both those types of offerings. So the complexity is now increasing, and while a lot of organizations want to focus on organizational agility, we have to be agile enough that we can now deal with a more robust number of options that our consumers will expect from us when they do engage us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it is, again, not just for this industry, but all others, anything that was happening is getting accelerated. We were in an environment, and I used to say in presentations that, our consumers have been Amazon, and now in 2020, it's like 10 times as big of Amazon as it was. But what that means is, the things like predictive analytics and real-time activity, ways to help our customers in real time, new ways to prevent. I think seeing the industry finding ways to help their customers prevent the disaster. We have long been a industry that's focused on detecting and repairing, and now shifting into an area where we're going to be able to better predict and prevent, and that's where the value of the customer that's where their value will be for insurance. And so that's a different type of model, and you're going to need the innovation to really get us there. And I think it was, everybody was still kind of doing their petting zoo of innovation and just kind of going around and seeing what was out there. But now, it's been forced down all of our throats, and we've got to use it. And we obviously need to use it in the right way, but I'm very encouraged about, just how much we've jumped in on innovation. I think that's really going to change the consumer experience.
One last question then, kind of just piggybacking off of that, Sean, before we go into the next topic is, in the chat room, kind of a question about your perspectives on InsurTech and talking about innovation and hyper customer centricity and things of that nature. Do any of the four of you want to share any of your perspectives on the future of InsurTech and what it might mean for our industry?
I'll jump in terms of, I see InsurTech as, my lens on it has been, it's less likely that somebody comes out of Silicon Valley and, not having any connection to the insurance industry, all of a sudden they have, the Uberization of the insurance industry. I think what we do is just not so amenable to that kind of fundamental change. We've seen, however, that componentization, if you will, the creation of an InsurTech and insurance ecosystem where you have, the insurance companies leveraging components that are built by other partners, leveraging data sets that come from outside the insurance industry, just kind of this multi-channel interconnectivity as making us more efficient, giving us more capability. It is definitely more complex than if everything was just vertical within one within one organization. But to me, that's where I see this going.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. All right, we're going to move on to topic number 4, actually. We do have 4 topics. Next, logically, would be topic 3, but I'm going to jump to topic 4 because I think it's a more robust and interesting conversation than topic number 3, and because of time, I'd like to give it, its due attention. So topic number 4 is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the question is, what should the insurance industry do to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? And what might you be doing personally within your own companies to advance that as well? I'll ask Ryan to start if you don't mind.
Sure thing. Yeah. This here's the deal. To me, how do you represent your own customers? Right? Like, just take a look around. And I'll speak specifically to us. We serve customers in 27 languages here at Allstate Canada. We've got, on our leadership team, we speak 5 languages. We think about gender diversity. 55% of our board is female. 45% of my leadership team is female. You have to represent the people you're trying to serve. Like, it should be that simple. We revamped our corporate social responsibility program this year to talk about diversity and inclusion, specifically communities, to bring in people who maybe it's physical, maybe it's mental challenges. They can't be part of communities today. This could be immigrants, refugees. Canada accepts a lot of refugees each and every year. And how can we get them a stable part of our society, a benefit for the overall country, and maybe someday it'll be part of our products, but maybe not. Either way, us protecting and preventing and fostering a better environment here. So to me, it's just the fundamental. How can you not, if you want to represent the customers that you're serving?
Thank you, Rob. Victor, would you like to follow up with your perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Listen, it's been an incredibly interesting summer. A lot of different things that are going on that are raising a lot of different questions, whether we call it diversity, equity, inclusion, whether we call it race relations, but the profile of our world is changing. The demographics are changing. And those who embrace that, those who accept it, I think are going to have the opportunities to succeed in the future. And those who don't, I think will begin to question, why didn't I do more? And I probably had that opportunity to do more. I take a lot of pride in the work that the CAS is doing to help identify and illuminate a lot of these different issues. As a matter of fact, Steve and I partnered on some communications this summer, speaking about the different things that the CAS is committed to. We also, as you heard from Steve this morning during the town hall, talked about some of the different investments that the CAS is making to really create a different environment as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I even think about in terms of putting our money where our mouth is, and I give the membership of our organization a lot of credit. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that if you think about the big five actuarial societies in the U.S., that this is the first time where we've had two separate societies, the CAS being one, that now have two women who are president and president-elect of their organizations. And I think that's great because it speaks to progress. And we know the thing with progress is that it still creates more opportunity for us to do more. And the more that we can do to commit to diversity, equity, inclusion, to be inclusive in terms of how we do things, and that can run the gamut all the way from race and ethnicity to sexual orientation. And I'm just so excited that we at least are putting these things on the table to be able to have not only the conversations, but to be able to take actions and move them forward. So that's what I'm most excited about as I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that we are now taking action in really different and unique ways than we ever have before.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add on to just also understanding that what's been done so far, and in particular around race diversity in our industry, and we're not the only industry here, but I think we do have to accept the situation for what it is and what's been done so far, and that's not enough, and that we need to rethink our model. You look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics about our industry, you see that progress has been made with women in the industry, but certainly a significant amount of work to overcome for people of color working in our industry. And Ryan, I absolutely agree with you that if we're going to serve a customer base, we as an industry should reflect that. And I think, though, it does require a new way of doing things, probably, because, again, what's been done so far just hasn't worked. It's not that it's been intentional, it's just where we're at. And so I've been encouraged of late getting involved with a couple different groups and individuals. Dr. Lee Nunnery, as well as the National African American Insurance Association, they put together a report out of Marsh, and I applaud Marsh for it, about just what has been happening to a black person in insurance as an industry. And they're really working to begin to bring this to the forefront and find ways, measured ways, that we can make some progress and some changes. So at III, we're actually engaged with Dr. Nunnery on an action program that will be around suppliers to the industry and see how we can broaden out the diversity there. And I think we got a lot of good work to do in the talent area. We have jobs to give in this industry. There are going to be 500,000 jobs available in the next few years. We have an incredible opportunity to make that a diverse talent pool just in that way. But I think that's got to be a big focus. It's got to be a big collaboration. I'm encouraged again by some collaboration. I participate on a bi-weekly call with all the industry trade associations where we talk about this and we try and find ways to leverage each other's work. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it clearly is on the forefront in our industry, in boardrooms, and elsewhere, and that's where it needs to be right now so we can get the right action taken.
I think one of the things, concrete steps that we can take within our organizations, to Ryan's point about, we need to reflect the customer base that we seek to serve. I'm constantly challenging my team to think about when you've got a hiring or promotion decision, if you find yourself asking the question, is this person a good fit? Flip that around and say, is this person different? Is this person bringing something that the team doesn't already have? Because I think it's easy to fall into, is it a fit for what we already do have? So being intentional about, creating diversity. And then I come back to listening. We've been doing within Willis Towers Watson, we've been doing a lot of town halls around, how people have been dealing with, the killing of George Floyd, how people have been dealing with working from home with small children, how people have been dealing with, the fact that they have a condition that means that they need to be extra, extra careful about, possible exposure to COVID, all those different things. But instead of where I think in past years, maybe we would have avoided those topics because they were uncomfortable. being intentional to say, we're going to talk about this. We want to talk about this. We want to hear what your experiences are. And I have heard a number of cases where, colleagues in those town halls, it sounds cliche, but you could hear the light bulb going on over their head. You could hear like, oh, I hadn't thought about this being your experience. And I think that's something, not only that it's the right thing to do for our colleagues and for our community, but it can't help but make us a more successful business if people are able to bring their whole selves to work and feel that they are part of a community. So, just a few things that we've been doing to try to address these issues.
Thank you, Alice. There's a couple questions that have come in. We've talked to some extent about like racial diversity and gender diversity. So this is kind of another element of diversity, and we'll just kind of call it, for lack of a better word, educational diversity. And so Rose has a question which has to kind of do with your recruiting practices or your recruiting philosophies. If there's any change in how those might be evolving in this world to potentially, like you said, Alice, consider somebody who's maybe not a good fit, but maybe somebody who's a little bit different. And so is there a trend potentially going on in recruiting philosophies or recruiting practices to maybe look beyond GPAs, look beyond specific universities that are really deep potentially into actuarial science majors? Can you kind of comment on maybe what you and your company might be thinking about with respect to recruiting practices changing on an ongoing basis? And looking for different educational diversity.
Yeah, I'll start and pass the ball because I'm part. Actually, I chair the Global Inclusion and Diversity Committee within Willis Towers Watson, which does not make me an expert on the topic whatsoever. It just means that I'm trying to help link people together to have these conversations. But among the things that we're doing is going through our job postings and looking at the language that's used in the job postings to try to make sure that language is not, causing people to self-select themselves out of applying for the job. We're looking at where we have degree or experience requirements and challenging ourselves, like, is it really necessary to have a college degree? I mean, heck, is it really necessary to have a college degree to be an actuary? I don't think so. Pass the actuarial exams. Is it really necessary to have a college degree to be a successful insurance broker? Absolutely not. Some of the most successful folks that I know in the business do not have a college degree. I think outreach to universities, colleges that are beyond the usual, that's another thing that we're trying to do much more intentionally.
Thank you, Alice. Brian, Sean, Victor, anything to add from your perspectives?
If you focus on education, I'm a product of the non-major university actuarial programs. I went to small school, Wheaton College, just outside Chicago, liberal arts. So I believe in that. I think there's great opportunity there for us to recruit beyond the major schools. And I should also say Canada has some unbelievably terrific actuarial universities between Waterloo and I think Laval might have been the first in North America. But I do think there's an opportunity to look for students, and I'll focus on the liberal arts because I am passionate about that. When you think about where we are in the economy and what alternatives some of those students have or don't have right now, there's talent there that says, wow, I could get a job in the actuarial field that may never have considered it before. And they have some of those maybe stronger leadership skills or problem-solving skills, but just haven't applied it in this way. I do think there's a great opportunity looking at some of those smaller schools.
Yeah, and that's going to be a specific – I'm sorry, you want to go ahead, Sean?
No, go ahead, Victor, please.
I was going to say just quickly that's going to be a specific endeavor of the CAS to start working with our stakeholders, both on the employer side and different organizations, to help them think more openly about the different ways where they can identify talent and not just go into the traditional tried and true pipelines, if you will, thinking about the different sciences, thinking about biology or chemistry majors, so on and so forth, and thinking about folks who do come, as Ryan pointed out, from some liberal arts communities. The more expansive we can be and the more that we can identify, and at some level, the onus is also on us to be able to sell ourselves and sell the sort of opportunities and sell the creativity that comes with the work that our members do in this space, the more we can get people energized and excited about that and cast that net more broadly, I think that's the opportunity as well. So while we have to do more, I think there's also a lot that we can do together to really make sure that we're opening as many doors as possible and we're not just limiting ourselves to those tried and true pipelines.
And here's another example where I think collaboration really can come into play for the industry. Back, I think it was 80s or 90s, and nobody wanted a job in accounting, but the way that those accounting firms collaborate on campus, and show up, and they compete for the students, but they show up together. These are the types of things that we got to be thinking about, and also thinking of different ways to illustrate what insurance is. We've talked in this discussion about climate and extreme weather. That is on the minds of virtually every college student. And we've at the III, we've for the last 3 years hosted a hackathon with Wharton, and it's University of Pennsylvania is one of the largest hackathons in the country. And so we've each year had about 40 teams competing, and these are programmers, these are IT people, they're coming up with these great ideas, but we're also motivating them that this is what insurance can do. You can make a difference in the likes of climate change through, fostering resilience initiatives. So I think our approach, how we talk about ourselves, as well as bringing ourselves to campus together, is going to be really important.
We have one other question, maybe one or two other questions here. I'll read this one verbatim. It comes from Malika, and her question is, have your conversations with employees changed since the events of this summer? And if so, how? Alice, you touched upon that a little bit, I know already, so you can elaborate even more if you'd like. But just wondering how these conversations have changed, if at all, based off of the events of this summer with your employees.
I definitely think, we've been intentionally opening up those uncomfortable conversations. We've established some reverse mentoring programs so that the more senior executives are paired with a more junior colleague, typically a person of color, to just, share back that experience. What is it like to be a younger person of color in the company? What's that experience and moving through society? And I think, our conversations have been maybe more personal, and people are being more open to share their experiences and to listen.
Very good.
I think, our whole company is working from home, and there is something also just around this medium where I've been spending a lot more talking about the dog that's sitting on the bed behind me, and they're talking about the books on their bookshelf, their 6-year-old that's running through the room. And so there's a bit of an intimate, we're in this thing together with our own different challenges, and that has led to broader conversations around relationships, around what are we doing for consumers, around, there's something more that's been happening, albeit not everybody loves it, don't get me wrong, but it has changed the tenor of things for sure.
Thanks for sharing.
It's all about stretching our boundary. It's all about being uncomfortable even, but it's taking that first step where we are willing to share, or willing to open up. And as staff at the CAS, we've had those conversations this year. We've had our employees share stories, particularly those who have been on the wrong side of some of these situations, share either personal stories or stories of their family in terms of things that have happened and gone on. So you can see that it opens the eyes of people when they start to hear directly from the voices that have been impacted. And to me, that's a really good thing. So always try to look for silver linings in a world full of chaos and a lot of anxiety. And again, pointing back to a lot of the things that have happened this summer, I think it certainly has created the opportunity for us to have more direct conversations with one another. And if we're bringing the right people to our teams and building the right sort of sensitivity to the things that are going on in the world, I think some amazing conversations can happen. And as a result of that, the potential for change.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, I'm looking at time. I'm going to close up that topic. I'm going to mention what topic number 3 was, because the last thing I want people to go out there thinking was, what was 3? Well, topic number 3 was the insurance industry talent gap. And the main question had to do with how might we be able to attract new people to consider our career that might not have considered us in the past. And while we didn't go deeply into that question, I do think the conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion did kind of bring some of those thoughts to the foreground. So topic number 3 and topic number 4 do bleed into a little bit. So maybe at another roundtable we can discuss the insurance industry talent gap in more specific detail. But I'd like to conclude with just another kind of around-the-clock question that I'd like each of the 4 of you to answer. And I'd just like you to try to imagine someone at 3 different professional stages of their career. I want you to think of someone at their college, when they're in college, as a college student, someone who's at their early career actuarial journey, and then someone who's in their mid-career actuarial journey. So college, early career, mid-career. You have a little bit of time with that single person at each stage of their career. What specific advice would you give them at each of those specific 8 stages of their career to become the best actuary and best professional they can be? We'll start with Sean this time.
Great. Yeah. So, thinking about this, for me, and it goes back to some of the discussion that we're having, I would tell somebody in college to look at insurance and take it seriously, because you're looking at somebody who didn't. I made it to a final round of interviews with a really notable insurer, and flew me to this great place to stay and interview and do these things. Every single time, it's like, well, how do you feel about working in insurance? Like, everybody believes that they're just going to be Ned from Groundhog Day who's chasing, Bill Murray around to buy a life insurance policy. And you can do virtually anything in this industry. And again, and where our economy is today, and if I'm a student that's looking to get into something that's safer and secure and you can make a difference in the world, I would absolutely tell them to work in insurance. Now, for the early and mid-career folks, early career, it's the perfect time to make sure that, you get it just like your GPA in college, get it high and get it fast. Make sure you're working hard and setting that right first impression. But both early and mid should be open, I think, to other horizons and expanding themselves. Even at an early and mid-point career, it's a great opportunity to take a lateral move just to learn a different something in an organization that might be interesting to you that you could put into your career portfolio. So be open and expand your horizons as you're developing your career.
Thank you. And for sake of time, I'm only going to call on one other person. So Ryan, I'm going to give you last words if you don't mind.
Oh boy, Groundhog Day, great pandemic movie. We watched that with the kids this summer. As a college student, I would just say, figure out what your interests are. You may not know exactly what industry. I know we all think insurance is great, but figure out what your interests are. And if you know them, that's great. But just don't assume. So take that time to really say, hey, I really do want a technical expertise. I really do like working with people. Like, just find a bit of a groove. Early career, this is the time to me to learn and be curious. Be crazy curious. Learn what you're doing on the job, but learn what motivates your boss or motivates your boss's boss, because you're going to learn broader things around the industry while you're learning it yourself. And then number 3, and I'm right there with Sean, if you haven't taken a risk by the mid-career, too late, man. Do something crazy. Do something that you never expected you were going to do. Get out of the norm. A lateral move is a great idea, but I would say take some risks by mid-career for sure.
Thank you, Ryan. And I think everybody's going to remember those last words. Do something crazy. That's that's right. We understood what you meant for sure. So thank you. I just want to take a minute to thank Sean, Alice, Victor, Ryan. I thought this conversation was terrific. I think we could have talked for another hour and a half if we had that luxury. But sadly, all good things have to come to an end. So I want to thank you all so very much. And I'd like to remind everybody who's online to please fill out the survey if you can to help us get better at what we do. And if you've been with us all day, thank you so much for helping celebrate all of our new members and award winners this morning. Thank you for listening to our new strategic plan that we're implementing next year and how excited we as the CIS are for doing that. And hopefully at this session you learned a little bit about what it takes to be a successful person in the insurance industry and some tips beyond just doing something crazy that might actually help you get there. So thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Great job.
Thank you for participating in this webinar. You will soon be receiving a survey via email, and you are encouraged to share your feedback with the CAS. Your comments will play an important role in shaping future CAS webinar offerings. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.